Welcome to ChinaTalk, a series of interviews with leading global experts on China and East Asia. The series is produced jointly by the Polish-Chinese Business Council and the SWPS University here in Poland. I'm Marcin Jacoby, I'm head of the Department of Asian Studies, and my co-host for this meeting, as for all the other meetings in the ChinaTalk series, is Mr. Zbigniew Niesiobędzki, the president of the Polish-Chinese Business Council. Zbigniew, good morning.
Good morning.
This series is a series of the management space of SWPS University. This is a live webinar, so please, all the viewers, remember that you can ask questions using the chat box function, and I hope we can incorporate the questions in our conversation with our guest. Today, we'll be talking about Chinese green transformation. We'll ask questions how China is changing. We will try to find out what the Chinese leaders are thinking about the changes, what are the priorities. And we have a very special guest for the webinar today, probably the best person to talk to in terms of the change in China, green policies, policies towards both climate change, to tackle climate change, as well as living habits. Our guest is Ms. Peggy Liu. She's the chairperson of JUICE, an organization that deals with clean energy, but not only, working on changing China, on advising Chinese leaders. And Peggy Liu has been very, very active in numerous fields of what she calls herself personal and planetary health. She's been author, advisor, coach, speaker. She has had a whole series of very, very high-level appointments, and she's been board members of different organizations. She was called one of the most innovative thinkers of Asia, and she is actually the author of the China Dream Initiative from 2010, which later, as I understand, became one of the most important slogans of China in recent years. We are very, very honored to have Peggy Liu with us. Peggy, good morning.
Oh, I'm honored. It's my honor to be on this podcast, and I'm so glad to say hi to my Polish friends. And thank you so much for pronouncing my name, Liu. That's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Zbigniew?
Okay, I'm delighted to be able to host you in our ChinaTalk series also. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So I will start with a brief introduction. First, facts. China is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide. China uses around half of all coal that's produced worldwide every year. In 2020, it opened about one large coal plant per week. Additionally, China suffers from soil and water contamination. This significantly reduces the economic and social potential of your country. The challenges facing China in this context and in addition in its international obligation are extremely enormous. So we would like us to look at the ecological changes taking place in China as a process. It would be great if we talk about the main actors, phenomena, used instruments and new technologies, the global environment, pros and cons, opportunities and threats, and so forth. So finally, if we would like to talk with you about the topic of healthy eating and how this topic affects the environment. If you agree, we can start.
That's wonderful. I agree.
Okay, fine. So let's start with the main actors involved in the environmental processes in China. Could you define them?
The main actors of environmental, I think, a lot of people, when they say environmental progress, they think clean energy only. That's the first thing. They say solar, they say wind, they say non-fossil fuel. But actually, if you look at something called Drawdown, which I'm on the board of drawdown.org. It's a nonprofit that has the first framework that shows you a whole bunch of interventions that will help you stop climate change, not just slow it down, but stop and reverse climate change. So please take a look at that. But what's interesting about that framework is that it takes a look at what some of the largest contributors are to climate change. And actually, food is one of the biggest contributors. So a third of the greenhouse gas emissions come from our food supply. 60 to 70% of our drinking water goes to agriculture, the plastics in our ocean. So there's many interventions, for example, family planning, educating girls. So you have one person, and person equals carbon emissions really on Earth, and humans equal waste. So surprisingly, what I have learned by being a board member of Drawdown is that the actors that are helping with the progress towards a healthier, a safer, a cleaner, more thriving China are much more diverse than what people would imagine. There's essentially two things when it comes to sustainability. It's a balance. There's infrastructure of creating the energy, and there is the use, the demand. And then for all of the inputs that come from the earth, it's the same thing. It's how do you use the resources? How much resources do you use? So actually, the people that are helping with planetary health are also helping with personal health. They're the urban planners like the mayors. They're the people who create healthy food. They're the people who clean up the water. They're the people who plant the trees, not just the people who are creating the concentrated solar in Gansu or the large wind farms. It's not just the people who are creating more efficient coal plants on the way to reducing all coal plants. It's not just the people who are investigating carbon capture sequestration, taking carbon from the air. It's really all of us together thinking and working together are really helping the progress of China. And it's the word together that is the secret to how China is progressing so quickly.
Okay, so you look very broadly at the term of green change, incorporating a lot of things that's on the level of single citizen and inhabitant of China. Could you tell us a little bit about JUICE itself? What does the organization do, and how do you work in China as an NGO?
So JUICE has a very interesting story. The story about China going green really started in 2007. If you take a look at the first ever climate action plan, it was in 2007. If you take a look at the amount of renewables that first were implemented, it started in 2007. So interestingly, our story also begins in 2006, launching our MIT Forum on the Future of Energy in China in 2007, April 2007. Now, what's interesting about this was that it accidentally, I'm just going to be honest here, okay, this was not planned, but it was accidentally the first public dialogues between US and Chinese government on clean energy. Now, this is 2007, so let me tell you, I was shocked too. I was like, what? When the US government said, how could this be? It's the first one. But, it is what it is. There always has to be a first. It's also very unique to have multiple disciplines. So the solar with the wind, with the creative people, with the journalists, with the different government, to the academics, all together in one forum. Very rare in China. So we had this very big sort of positive energy of togetherness come together in April with some of the top players in different sectors. And what I realized, what the government told me, was that at the time there were 60 MOUs, memorandums of understanding, between the two countries. And they were very frustrated. They said there's nothing tangible to show for progress with these 60 memorandums of understanding. So clearly we have the intent of working together, but we don't really know how to culturally bridge, to programmatically collaborate. So they said we need an NGO that sits in the middle, that helps us collaborate, that is not handicapped by being part of government, but it's supported by both sides. And so what I'm very good at is understanding what individual people and organizations, what their superpowers are, I like to call it, and how to make an ask where they can say yes and get everybody excited to create what I call a tornado of interest, of movement. And so this is exactly what happened. And so out of this first public dialogues between US and Chinese government officials, they said, you can't just stop with one event. You have to create this NGO. And, I was pushed. So I said, okay. The next day I said, okay, I will leave my venture capital job. No thinking whatsoever. I just followed my gut. And part of it is like, well, who else is going to do it if I don't just do it, right? And I can only help, not harm. So I left my job and I said, I'm going to spend 10 years to help reduce emissions so that China, with the help of all the countries in the world, can become a green leader versus a polluter. Why 10 years? Because at the time I was reading a lot of climate scientists, and they said we have 10 years before we reach a tipping point where a lot of what Johan Rockström calls planetary boundaries are crossed. I would say that we have passed that tipping point, but that doesn't mean that there's not hope, right? When you leave a plot of land empty, and over time, the grass always grows back, right? So 2007 to 2017, I spent that time really implementing some of the largest green changes that China has seen with the help of people all around the world and multiple leaders from different disciplines in China, all participating together. If I were to label this talk, it would be together. We can go green. So that's a little bit of the story of JUICE, but of course there's much more about the 6 times we have helped China go green across the nation. Now my story is really focused on how to teach you, the people watching this podcast, the lessons that I've learned, that everybody can do this type of change. It's possible for everybody to sit there in your living room on voice over IP, Skype and Zoom and Clubhouse together. All it takes is the passion to dream together and to believe that the future is possible. That is very simple. So I will tell you more about how we do that in this podcast.
You made a great job. Congratulations. But among the single people and NGOs, there are the lawmakers, politicians. Yeah, I know that you have carried out training for many Chinese provincial and central leaders. How can they be actively involved in these green processes? What are your observations in this regards?
So I will tell you a secret after I just redo my earphones here. I'm going to tell you a little secret of how China changes so quickly at such great scale without chaos. And this is what the China Academy of Governance, the head of the International Relations Department, told me. China is, I believe, one of 2 countries that I know of that has mandatory government training each year for 12 days minimum each person. Sometimes if they're getting promoted, they may take a month of training, sometimes 3 months of training, sometimes a whole year. Can you imagine if your mayor of your city had to take 12 days of mandatory training each year? Just imagine that, okay? Now imagine imagine a country the size of China that is dealing with opening up for the first time. We had the first supermarkets in 1990, maybe similar to you, I'm not sure. We really only started building cities in 1990. It's very, very recently. Imagine the amount of change the culture of the citizens have had to endure to learn, how do you use the safety belt in a car? How do you ride an escalator up 3 stories in a mall? How do you use a toilet that flushes? Okay, these are the things that in 2004, when I moved to China, we were still dealing with. How do you deal with water that is yellow from the faucets? How do you deal with rice that is poisoned in the soil? How do you deal with 1,000 AQI or, something ridiculous off the charts air quality index, the air apocalypse in Beijing? So China has come a long way in a very short time, in 30 years. So if you are a mayor, just step into the shoes of the president of Poland or mayor of your city. How do you make sure that people don't revolt, right? All of a sudden, you can't use bikes. You have to use cars. And then all of a sudden, you can't use motorcycles, 2-stroke motorcycles. You have to use electric ones. And then all of a sudden, you can't use certain cars during, certain hours. There's just constant policy changes. So the secret is this training, mandatory government training. I have been blessed that when I first came out of the MIT Forum of the Future of Energy in China, and April 7th, we decided to found Joint U.S.-China Collaboration on Clean Energy. I brought the U.S. government officials and I led them by the hand to meet the Chinese government officials in different departments, ministries. And I was asked to do 2 things. One of which was the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development, right? Like a Ministry of Construction. Mm-hmm. The minister sat there and said, maybe we can collaborate by you creating a class for our mayors in the National Academy of Mayors for China on how to build eco-cities. This was in 2007. By 2008, I had signed the contract. I had created the curriculum. I had invited some of the US speakers and the China speakers. And we led the first ever class for, imagine 50 mayors sitting in little wooden chairs where the desks are metal connected to the chairs, right? The desks and the chair, like in a little classroom. And the first class of what is an eco-city, defining that term, was in 2008. Now, since then, I moved that class from the National Academy for Mayors of China. I expanded to the China Executive Leadership Academy of Pudong, which is a part of Shanghai. Mm-hmm. Then I expanded it to the China Academy of Governance, which is the largest, the top party and government school in China. Now, these are the schools, 3 of the 8 schools that carry out the mandatory training. So they told me that the secret to harmonious change is this type of training. So over the years, what I did was I listened very carefully to the vocabulary of what the leaders were using for green, for eco-cities. So for example, if they've never used the term eco-cities, you have to start somewhere. You have to define it for them. And then you can start to talk about municipal waste and water, because at the time we still, believe it or not, we still weren't doing that. You can start to talk about district heating and cooling to introduce these concepts. And then you can start to talk about low carbon transportation. And you can start to talk about, much later, you can start to talk about eco-heritage tourism. You can talk about eco-livable city design. So this is the power of China, is that everybody likes education. Mm-hmm. I think you know that. And so they're willing to sit there for 3 hours at a time for one topic, or 10 days at a time, 12 days at a time, where we develop the curriculum in conjunction with the curriculum developer of these schools. And we do it at the pace that China is ready for taking these practices. And then the mayors are kings of the kingdoms in China. They have power to make decisions, and they will be executed. They'll be implemented. So then they go and they say, oh, Mark Levine of the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, this white roof concept to keep the roofs cooler is very interesting. And so they implement that, right? If we talk about waste or LED lighting, we'll bring in Philips. And they took us on a tour of how we use LED lighting to do city landscaping. So it's beautiful, but less energy. And now, of course, every city has beautiful light landscaping. They turn off around 10 p.m. and it's all LED, so much more energy efficient. So this is the way that you do large-scale implementation, large-scale change, holistic, systematic change. And this is the only way that you can make a difference when it comes to sustainability. You can't really do it house by house only. You can't even do it building by building. You really need to do it city by city.
Okay, so it's educating the elites and creating a language for them, and also creating incentives for them to reach out to new technology in order to fulfill their goals of governing successfully the cities. So you talked about this sort of city municipality level. Now, we also would like to talk about the central level. Probably, and also one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you about green change in China was the announcement by President Xi Jinping of carbon neutrality by 2060. This was, of course, big news around the world. Now, looking at this sort of top level, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on this? How far this target and how far the goals that the Chinese government sets for China in sort of green transformation are ambitious for China? And also, we have the first questions from Ms. Sylvia Kania, which goes very much in this direction. She asks us basically about two things. One, about the nuclear power. China is still developing the nuclear energy, and how does this play in the picture of sort of a clean energy transformation? And another question is about the role of hydrogen in low carbon economy. If you could elaborate on these two, it would be great.
Yes. Well, first, let me talk about the central planning and address your question. The interesting thing about China is that you may call it a communist country, but what I was told by my friend who's in the Ministry of Finance and Stanford Ph.D., speaks fluent English. Actually, his wife also went to Stanford for a Ph.D. Very smart people. These are very highly educated people in Chinese government. That's one thing you should know is that when I was teaching for 1,000 mayors and central government officials, one of the things that I realized was the last administration, everybody had an engineering degree, probably a master's degree, everybody. And there's females and males. In this generation, this administration, Xi Jinping's administration, there's also now economists. So I call them techonomists, right? But there's no actors or, dogs who are mayors, right? Like in certain cities, right? I mean, these are planners. These are people who think really long term. And they realize that you have to work together systematically. So first, you have to put yourself in the Chinese government's shoes. And who are these people that are going to Stanford or Harvard Kennedy School and getting their PhDs? They're very smart. And they don't just lead one city because they were born there, they grew up there, or whatever. They're actually transferred from large city, small city, rural, urban, to be able to lead China holistically. So it's very, very interesting, this dynamic of what a leader in China looks like and how they look at a problem, right? I'm an engineer, so I was trained as an electrical engineer, computer science major from MIT, and the way that I think is very long-term, very systematically, neutrally, not really emotionally, right? So it's a slightly different dynamic when the entire leadership has this type of background, right? But it also means that they're really terrible at media. I'm sorry, you know, they're not going to give you 30-second funny clips, with a meme with hearts, and no, that's just not China. But what they will do is they'll give you business plans. They'll give you 5-year business plans. The entire country has these 5-year plans with metrics. For example, you said by 2060, of course, that's not a 5-year plan, but the long-term vision is by 2060 to be carbon neutral. The entire country being carbon neutral. If you haven't heard this news, you really have to sit there and meditate and think, what does that mean? That is incredible. By earlier than 2030, there will peak emissions. Okay. So every 5 years, there's numbers, right? So now we're in the 14th 5-year plan. So for example, our energy mix, 20% will come from renewables, right? I think nuclear, for the woman who asked, the goal is up to 5% nuclear. China is very pro-nuclear. They're very innovative in nuclear technology. A lot of the next level generation nuclear technology is much safer than the old technology. And I think everybody just, for people who are worried about safety, I think the main thing is plan that everything will fail at some point. So you have to have a plan. If you don't have the plan, that's where the problem comes from. Plan for failure, right? So 20% renewable energy by 2025, and carbon dioxide intensity 18%, right? Reduce it by 18% by 2025. So those are the types of numbers that you get in these 5-year plans. Now what happens is every single region, right, then has, for example, Shanghai is part of a greater Yangtze River region. They have their 5-year plan because they have to say, how are you going to help with that bigger plan? And then Shanghai has many cities. This area has many cities. So each of those have 5-year plans. And then each city has districts. Each one of those districts has 5-year plans. So for example, when Beijing announced that they were going to remove all coal-fired boilers from the city, not only was there a 5-year plan with a date, but the persons in charge were named in the policy, right? So face, Chinese term face, if you don't do it, you're shame, right? That's part of it, right? Glory and shame, carrot and stick. So what this Ministry of Finance executive said, or person said, leader said, is that China isn't the type of communism that people think of. It's a multinational corporation. We have a CEO and a chairman. We have a board. We have branches and branch managers. We have GMs, right? It's the same thing. And they have success metrics, or KPIs, key performance indices, and they have to meet them, right? China tends to commit to stuff that they already sort of know that it's possible. They're not going to do something way out there that they don't really know. They don't know how to get there, and that's okay. They don't say, this is the policy and this is how you get there. They say, this is the metric that you should reach. And then Shanghai, you figure it out. Beijing, you figure it out. Tianjin, you figure it out. You pilot. So first there'll be a few cities that are pilots. Then there'll be 5 cities that are pilots. Then there'll be 10 cities that are pilots if it looks like there's some progress. And each of these pilot cities get money, subsidies, and glory because they're a model. Then there's 25 cities, and then all of a sudden it's the national code, right? This is how every single change in China happens. Is that helpful?
Yes, it's definitely helpful. Okay. So it's very much about being professional and being
engineering
change in a very professional way.
Right. Yeah. But you told about the pledges, the obligations of the governments on different level. But we observe that the Chinese economic recovery now from the pandemic so far has been anything but green. So I saw the recent Carbon Brief report, and they analyzed and they noticed that the sharp rebound in China's energy use and emissions output reflects to the pattern of dirty recovery, so that this rebound was based on the most energy intensive sectors, construction, heavy manufacturing. So you told that, I understand that you sure that sustainable approach to development is possible under Chinese conditions, yes? That this is only the the situation which was noticed in the last years was not fixed, that the future will be better from the ecological point of view.
Every day has been a better day since I've been here. And I'm pretty sure it's been a better day since 1990 when they first started building. To your point about energy intensity, remember that economic recovery generally is coupled with energy use. So China has been able to not completely decouple, but it has been more successful than other countries in that you can have more economic growth at a different ramp of energy use. Now, if you look at every single financial slump that China has had since 2004, let's say 2007 when China first started to go green, what they tend to do is inject money and jobs by investing in infrastructure. Okay, so if you look at every single statistic, what they do is, okay, we'll invest more in building cities, right? And that creates jobs, it creates better lifestyle, people are happy. However, building cities requires cement and aluminum and steel and a lot of very heavy industry. 50% of our energy goes to heavy industry. Luckily, since 2007, I will say that thanks due in part to the NDRC working with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab on the energy efficiency of the top 1,000 and then 10,000 state-owned enterprises who are responsible for heavy industry. They have been able to increase the energy efficiency, right? So using less energy to create the same amount of cement or steel, right? However, it's still one of the most energy intensive, uses to or inputs into energy use. And so therefore you are to expect when you have to do a recovery and China inputs a lot of financial subsidies, that is going to go to building new or renovating older cities. And this is going to continue to happen for at least the next 5 years.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 10 years. Yeah.
You told that you see the changes every single day. Yes, I can only add that for last year, the first time China accounted for half of the world's growth in the renewable energy capacity on the report of International Energy Agency says. So this is a big factor. This is the big success of Chinese economy. So, but this report noticed that the agency predicts that the country is expected to add slightly less clean energy in 2021 as it phases out some subsidies for wind and solar projects in China. Can this sector develop without the state aid?
I think we need to, I think we need to be careful with looking just at numbers and not understanding the entire ecosystem of solar and wind. Right now, we have too much solar and wind. Not all of it is being used. Not all of the solar energy and wind energy that's being produced is being able to be put onto the grid and then be, from Gansu, the north, from the, the desert, it's not able to come to Shanghai. So some of the things that we need to invest money in are a better grid, right? Or ultra high voltage transmission lines to continue to build those out. The smart grid is one of the projects that we started in 2007, JUICE in China. But when we started at the request of the US government, they said, I think one of the great, not me, but they said one of the best ways to collaborate is to bring the smart grid technologies from the US, which is at the time the best, into China. So I was like, what is smart grid? So I, investigated. I drew a little picture with little icons of what a smart grid could look like. It's basically two-way and from between every node, and a little electric vehicle as energy storage and all the things that we know now what is smart grid. But again, at the time, the word smart grid didn't even exist in China. They literally looked at my papers, the diagrams, and they said, what is this electric vehicle? It seems like too much in the future. Maybe you should come back in 10 years. This is in 2007. So we already know what happened to electric vehicles. We certainly adopted that faster than they thought. So what happened was, from that day that I created this white paper and I started to knock on the utilities doors and figure out who's doing what, right? How can we make change across China? It's an interesting story because there's only 2 grid companies in China. One of them covers 80% of the landmass. That's the China State Grid. The other one is the Southern Grid. Of the China State Grid, there was one department, SEPRI, that looked at new technologies. Like, what is this smart grid, right? And then of that department, there was only 2 people that were allowed to talk to foreigners. This is how China works, right? So what I did was I made a commitment at the Clinton Global Initiative, and I said, we're going to do 3 forums on smart grid. We're going to bring the best of the best, like the vice presidents in charge of smart grid at IBM, Cisco, the CEO of Duke Energy, the CTO of Duke Energy, McKinsey, and the US Department of Energy, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, the top people literally in the world at the time, and Kima. And we brought them to China, to Shanghai, Beijing, and Yangzhou. And lo and behold, in 2.5 years, the China State Grid announced $7.2 billion to implement smart grid across the country by 2020. Right? But they own 80% of the landmass grid. So this was last year. So it takes some time to develop the technology, to hire all those people. But now, this is not just about a grid, it's about each city being connected to the grid, like a terminal. And so now there's at least over 500 cities that are considered, that they name themselves smart city pilots. So this is how fast China can change. When you say China is changing every day, actually China is a brand new country every 5 years, meaning you cannot recognize it practically every 5 years. Yeah. This is a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a great thing. Yeah. You told us a lot about the sort of knowledge transfer and inspiration from the US. Of course, you yourself were educated at one of the world's best universities, the MIT, and a lot of Chinese leaders have graduated from Ivy League universities. And you talked about this knowledge transfer, which is a great story. Now, of course, we know that the US relations are quite tense. But also a huge change is that China has become a leader in many of the green technologies. So we talked a little bit about solar, wind. We didn't really talk about electric car industry. We didn't talk about batteries. Now, China has been a leader in many of these. And what are the reasons for this? How did China manage to become a leader in these technologies so fast, being a learner? We know that China has been a very quick learner. And but now, the question many experts ask is and can China be self-sufficient in these technologies, especially as the relations with the US are not in the very best moment?
Well, I will say that even though my organization is named Joint US-China Collaboration on Clean Energy, very quickly we started to include other countries. And I would say around 2010, China's leaders started to look a lot in Europe, including sort of the Nordic countries, for examples, best practices. So Chinese people are good students, and they like to learn. They like to absorb. They send their people all around the world to look for the best practices, maybe a little bit harder the last year or so. But generally speaking, that's what they do. They don't have this, oh, it wasn't invented in China, therefore I can't use it, problem. They're just like, whoa, that's really interesting. How do we make it localized? How do we localize it for China? By the way, China isn't just China. A lot of people say, oh, China, like it's one country. It's like European continent where every province is a different language, food, look, clothing. I mean, we're really, really, really diverse in China. So I think people don't understand, like when we localize to China, it's not localizing to China, it's localizing to Chongqing, to Gansu, to Shanghai, Beijing, whatever. I mean, totally different cities, nothing like, So I would say that. Sorry, I got totally distracted by my.
The question is mostly probably about the self-sufficiency and green technologies and the leadership of China in these areas, how it came about and what you think the future is.
So China is a good student. It absorbs. It doesn't have the not invented here. It will learn. And of course, IP becomes an issue in international conversations. And I will say that that's a matter of building legal capability locally, which they are doing as fast as possible, not because they're, sad that people are criticizing them from outside China, that, Chinese people are stealing, whatever. Actually, it's because the Chinese companies don't want the other Chinese companies to steal their IP. Okay, so it's win-win motivation is what I call this, right? So they're building lawyerly legal capabilities and policies around IP as fast as they can. I mean, much faster than the Western countries did when they were sort of lawless and copying all the other countries, right? So I would say they're learning faster and absorbing and becoming the best role model that they can, much more quicker than anybody can think. So one is Chinese people are very good students. They like to be what I call guai guai, like how would you say this? Guai guai, like a good kid, like I'm a good kid. I'm not naughty, that type of. I don't know what word to use for that, but so they don't want anybody to criticize and say, oh, bad China, right? That makes them a little bit embarrassed, right? So I would say that they like to say, wow, we worked really hard. And now we're the green leader in smart grid, in LEDs, in eco cities, in clean energy. You said electric vehicles, like pretty much anything you can think of sustainable, they're now the leader in, right? But they like to say, we worked really hard, right? And then we localized it for the good of our citizens, because everybody should rise together, right? This is a very, socialist type mindset. It's very, I'm going to call it Taoist mindset, where everybody is one. Everybody should be one, not some elite and some poor, right? So they want to be guai guai, and they don't really care about saying we're the world leader, therefore we're dominant, because they really believe in win-win. All the neighbors need to prosper together, otherwise it creates violence. This should be obvious to everybody, right? But I don't think it is. But for Chinese, China, that's the whole point of the Belt and Road. Every neighbor needs to prosper together. And we, buy from you, you buy from us, and everybody's happy, no war, right? So, one, we are all one, we rise together, all boats rise together. And they rapidly prototype faster than any other country. So we don't really sleep. There's no real, like, if you were to WeChat me at midnight on Saturday, I would answer. It's just the culture. Or if I'm eating dinner, I would answer, right? It's just the culture. So work really hard, rapidly prototype. So for example, this is maybe outside the scope of this conversation, but like lipsticks, right? It might take, a international brand, fancy brand, 2 years to come with a lipstick, and then have all their lawyers and who knows what to make sure that it's safe and that it's IP and right? Whereas China will just like throw it out there and see if somebody buys it, and then boom, like 1 million people buy it in 15 minutes. Hey, it worked. Maybe we should make more, right? I mean, like, that's called rapid prototyping, okay? The guy who invented the self-driving car, Tom Chi, who co-founded Google X, taught me rapid prototyping, okay? It's learning, right? This is what China is really, really willing to do. And I told you earlier that it experiments at city scale, right? So literally it's giving money to, let's say, 25 cities to be a pilot for LED streetlights. So somebody's got to get it right. Not everybody has to get it right, but one of these cities has got to get it right. Then we can roll it out across the country. Or maybe, Shanghai and, someplace in Anhui got it right. We'll take a combination of that, and then it'll become national policy, right? So we can fail. It's okay at city scale. But if one of those darts hits the bullseye, then the entire country wins, because we're all one. We all succeed together, right? So I can talk more, but I will say, as somebody who travels the world, as somebody who benefits from the progress every day personally, I love living in China. So I'll tell you, I live in the center of Shanghai, and this is an example of how fast we're progressing. When I first moved to Shanghai in 2004, there was like 2 subway lines. Okay. Now there's the largest subway network in the entire world. I think it's twice as long as the London one, the original one, large subway network. And one day, one Christmas, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, I woke up and the government gave me 2 whole subway lines underneath my feet. I already had one subway line. They gave me 2 whole new subway lines. I'm not talking about exits, okay? I'm talking about lines, okay? So 2, 12, 13. And all of a sudden, you know what? I don't have to sit in this traffic anymore. I feel free. Like I can literally just get on the subway and go anywhere in the city for almost nothing. So cheap. And they're clean. All right, there's no pee or homeless lying down. Really clean, really safe. They're on time. It tells you exactly what time on the digital screen that it's going to arrive. There's guards that say, "Hey, stand in line, right? Don't push your way into the subway," because we're still training citizens, right? So for me, I benefit personally. And I think everybody who lives in China feels the same gratitude. And then they're like, it doesn't have to be perfect. There can be construction noise for a year, but I know that in a year, my city is going to be, my neighborhood is going to be completely different, and I'm going to benefit. So that's the beauty of being here in China.
Okay. So could you tell us how the smart city ideas is developing in China, and how this idea could improve the environment?
Well, smart cities to me is a combination of what we started with the eco cities and the smart grid plopped together. But really, when they say it, it's really about big data. And how you use the data is how you're going to benefit from it. So, for example, Hangzhou worked with Alibaba, because Alibaba's headquartered there, to create this whole huge, like, I'm going to call it a bat cave, like Batman cave, right? With the whole, walls full of dashboards and, the whole tables being digital controls and everything. And you can look at the commute, the traffic, and where the ambulances are or things like that as a citizen on the computer, right? So if that is helpful, then great, right? So, but if you don't use the data like anything, if you don't use it in a smart way, then it's less helpful. So I think each city is figuring out, what does it mean to be a smart city? What is locally important? So, for example, some are more rural or agricultural cities. They're going to have a different need than Hangzhou, which has a lot of cars. It's a city of 10 million people, which is actually quite small compared to Shanghai, which I think has 25 million people or more, depending on how many tourists and migrant workers there are at any one time. But now we have all these AQI monitors all throughout Shanghai. That's the type of data that I want to use, right? Is really, really useful for me. So I think that China is trying to really become more efficient in every single way possible. And logistics is something that hasn't historically been very efficient in China, using a lot of labor, using a lot of energy, etc. Right? So smart cities allow you, in some ways, to improve logistics. From an environmental point of view, there's water inputs, there's waste inputs, there's pollution, air quality, as I mentioned, right? There's energy use. So if it's too hot and maybe you need to shut down portions of the non-urgent, non-critical uses of energy, you can do that. So all of these things, the more you have data, the more efficient you are. I also think that there's a whole new category of jobs that is being created with smart cities. So this generation of millennials, I think, or whatever the next generation is, I'm not quite sure what the next generation is, but these people in schools now have a whole new set of jobs. I think I was talking to a woman, I'm not going to name her, but she is a chief strategy officer for redesigning a whole region of China. She's a chief strategy officer. And she was telling me that I think in one city of, let's call it, 128,000 population, they created 20,000 or so on order of new jobs just based on how to monitor and make efficient the citizen's life based on smart city or big data, right? It's sort of the same thing. So I think that a lot of people are worried that, these robots are going to take our jobs. Yes, they'll take our jobs. A lot of the jobs that robots, are better at and more efficient. But there's also a lot of new jobs that we can think of that are just going to make life much more interesting.
Yeah, let's maybe devote the last few minutes of our webinar on talking about your topic of great passion, as I understand, the living habits. And could you tell us, you mentioned some of the challenges. We know that the Chinese population is eating more and more meat, and this is a huge strain on the environment. How do you engineer social change? How do you entice people to change their eating habits, the living habits, so that it's better for the environment? What is the work that is being done in China?
So it's interesting. This is probably one of the things that I'm going to devote the next 10 years of my life to do, which is to teach people how to make societal scale behavior change. Because Juice has done it with the China Dream, which is now the national slogan. And this is really embedding these images of a sustainable world as our future by default. You don't even need to call it a sustainable world. There's green grass there, there's blue sky there, and happy children. So infrastructure change is very different than societal scale citizen level behavioral change. And what I've realized is that surprisingly, and it's too bad we have the last 5 minutes devoted to this, but it's called tornado leadership, okay? As an MIT engineer, I learned how to be very structured. As a McKinsey consultant, I learned how to do business plans and spreadsheets and PowerPoint, very structured thinking. What I realize is that to change behavior on a citizen level at societal scale, collectively, you need to behave like a tornado. You cannot know the business plan and the path. You cannot know the rungs on the ladder. The rungs on the ladder are appearing as the tornado starts to spiral, and you magnetize more and more particles, people, companies, government leaders into this tornado. And people who are going at the same speed and same direction, the same angular momentum, become the tornado, and they help magnetize more people. And at some point, which is usually about 2.5 to 3 years, the tornado has a life on its own, right? But the tornado begins with one person breathing life into it. The initial gust of a tornado is simply somebody's dream of the future. Okay, the dream of the future and they describe it with such passion, entrepreneurs, right? Oh yeah, the future with this technology, but imagine somebody dreaming the entire future. Imagine James Cameron drawing the Avatar world, right? It took him 10 years, but that was his dream. Now, of course, then he had to bring all these other artists and technology people and CGI people to then create the details of the dream, right? But then the more details you put into this dream, the tornado, more particles, they have more inertia. And it's harder and harder to stop this tornado. And then it changes the landscape in front of them, right? And the more inertia this tornado has, again, the more people it comes. And it's the key thing with the tornado, right, is the thing that I had to learn and change as an individual person, is that you cannot control the tornado's path. You just have to sit in the middle of the storm, right? And be centered and calm, right? And to see from afar the distance, right? And to feel, you need to feel the tornado. You cannot think the tornado. So this is what has happened in every single one of the changes that JUICE has made collectively across China, in bringing smart grid to China, in accelerating the clean energy adoption across China, in catalyzing eco-city development across China, in changing the building codes from incandescents to energy efficient lighting, in changes in food, dietary habits with food heroes, in the China Dream, the slogan, to green bonds, the adoption of green bonds. Those are very big changes. But everybody can dream, and therefore actually everybody can make these changes if they understand that it's about feeling, who's moving at the same direction, the same speed of this tornado? Let's bring them in, right? And then you have to be okay with change and not knowing the next step, the next pebble, right, across the river. And a lot of the engineers, actually, they're very uncomfortable with that. So really, my path as a leader has been to change myself, ironically, first. And to be okay with that, and to throw out business plans, actually, to throw out annual reports, and really just trust my gut, and then use my experience to implement. But the decisions are made with my heart and feeling, where's the tornado going? That's a completely different type of leadership skill, what I call tornado leadership.
Wow, not a typical engineer speech at all. Very inspiring.
So you teaching young kids and parents to eat in a way is good for themselves and the planets. Yes. So I have the question connected with this. Is childhood obesity a big problem in China now? How do you see it?
Oh, it's huge. It's a huge problem. We have more diabetics per capita in the world, right, in China. And you might say, well, how could that be? All the Chinese people I know are really skinny. But, what's happened is that our diet has completely westernized. And we've adopted things like milk in our coffee, for example, sugar in our drinks, or very large portion meals. So, for example, steak meals. You used to be that we just have condiments, meat as little slivers on top of the rice or top of the noodles. But now they're adopting these, large pizzas or something like that. And so this is a very big problem. And because we're urbanizing, people are not out in the fields. They're not walking long distances. They're not getting outside. So what we try to teach, what we've taught with Food Heroes, we've created a whole curriculum with the top nutritionists in the world, top doctors and top sustainability experts, and then the people who know how to gamify kids' curriculum with cartoons. We put this into one curriculum for 5 to 8 year olds. And what we're trying to do is teach them a holistic appreciation of where food comes from, how to eat it, and then how to recycle it, right? So eat a rainbow every day is plant-rich diet. Every part of nature can be reborn. It's food waste and composting, right? Mm-hmm. Reducing food waste and doing composting. Yeah. Sharing food is sharing love, right? So being mindful of the food that you're eating and who you're sharing it with. These are ways that are humanizing all of the ways that can combat climate change, can reduce obesity and diabetes, can clean up our water, clean up the plastic pollution in our oceans, help, with hunger, world hunger. And actually, if you go through all of the 17 global goals, the one solution, the one program that touches every 17 global goal is teaching how to eat in a way that is better for you and better for the planet. So that was our Food Heroes curriculum.
Mm-hmm. So maybe my last question. Could you tell me what is in your diet, in your menu today?
In my menu today?
Yeah.
Well, right now I'm drinking sort of like detox juices. So it's sort of like green juices, vegetable juices. Try not to mix the vegetables with the fruit, otherwise they ferment. I am a big believer in intermittent fasting. So it just means going a longer period of time before you eat and resetting your metabolism. I believe in really saying thank you to your food. So not eating as much of it, but saying thank you to the food that you have. And then when you drink water, I believe in imagining myself pouring joy into the water before I drink it. So you connect to the earth that gave you the food, right? This makes you happier and healthier. So with less food, cleaner food, colorful food, living food, a rainbow of food, your spirit is happier, your body is happier. So I like to eat joyfully and joyful foods, with joy and joyful foods.
This is a great ending line for our webinar. Peggy,
Good.
It's been a great pleasure to have you and to hear about all the fascinating changes of China and the processes you have orchestrated, you have participated in. Thank you very much for your time, for all the information. Just to remind our viewers, our guest was Ms. Peggy Liu, chairperson of JUICE. Thank you very much, Peggy, for the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope your viewers enjoy it and take something away from it. And I will see you online.
Thank you very much.
Definitely they will. Thank you.